King Louis XIV of France reportedly only bathed twice in his lifetime.
Louis XIV actually only bathed twice in his life.
King Louis XIV only took 3 baths in his life is probably just a rumor.
Louis XIV took only 2 baths during his long lifetime. His doctors prescribed the first in 1665 when he was 27 to help him recover from a bout of convulsions. But the presiding physician interrupted the process when Louis seemed not to hold up well under the strain. Peter Ward, The Clean Body, A Modern History. Bonjour, mesdemoiselles fuckers. It is I, Louis XIV, here to discuss my personal bathing habits with you nosy miscreants. This factoid, or fun fact, by the way, I hate fun facts because they're never fun and they're rarely ever facts, has been thriving in the sweet garden hellscape of the internet for years. It is also one of my particularly favorite topics seen in the absolute dumpster fire that is bad history TikToks. I got way too invested in this whole Louis XIV bathing thing, as you can see. And I, being the rabbit hole loving, historic, hygiene obsessed girly pop that I am, decided it was time for a deep dive. Because some stinks, y'all. And I don't think it was Louis's unwashed ass. Excusez-moi? You heard me. With that, my friends, let's get into it and answer the most titillating question on all of the history internet. Did Louis XIV only take 2 or 3 baths in his entire lifetime? Part 1. Was Louis hygienic? Short answer is yes. By social health standards of the 1600s, Louis was extremely hygienic. In the book Concepts of Cleanliness, Changing Attitudes in France Since the Middle Ages by Georges Vigarello, we are able to gain a decent understanding of what Louis's morning routine looked like. Hi! Do you guys need to go potty? Hold that thought. First, he would wake up around 8 a.m. after what we would hope would be a fantastic night of sleep. And if Louis XIV was by chance looking for a new mattress to help with his sleep quality, I would actually love to recommend to him a birch mattress, which just conveniently is also the sponsor of this video. Bonjour, we meet again. Birch believes in making mattresses from organic and natural materials, like organic cotton, wool, and natural latex. Hi, buddy. And I've actually had my birch mattresses in my room and my guest room for years now. I've had the one in my room for over 2 years, and this one is actually over 3 years old. And my mom loves this birch mattress so much that she actually ended up getting one for her own home. So we are like a birch mattress family. Do they sponsor these videos? Yes, absolutely they do. But that doesn't change the fact that I do genuinely love this mattress, guys. And I seriously recommend them to people all the time. They're so comfortable and they're so well made. They're GOTS and Green Guard Gold certified, which means that they're free of any polyurethane-based foams and harsh, unnecessary chemicals and pollutants and VOCs. They're also Fair Trade and Forest Stewardship Council certified too. And they're fiberglass free, which is a good thing, trust me. Now look, if you're in the market for a new mattress, I do genuinely recommend Birch. They are currently running an extended Labor Day sale, so if you go to the link in my description, www.birchliving.com/abbycox, or you scan this QR code, you will get 25% off your Birch mattress plus 2 free Eco-Rest pillows. And as with all Birch mattress purchases, you'll also get a 100-night sleep trial, so that way you know that mattress works for you, because you know, bodies are different, and also a 25-year warranty and free delivery if you're in the United States. If you are someone who needs help with setup or old mattress removal, they do offer that service too. So with that, I want to say a huge thank you to Birch for being such a great supporter of this channel and for sponsoring this video. All right, now where was I? Oh yes, hygiene. First, he would wake up around 8 a.m. and like every other adult, go to the bathroom and release his buzz. Then he would comb his hair and rub down his head to remove the body of dirt, sweat, and oils. He would use a linen towel when he did this. And then he would clean his teeth and his ears. Cream of tartar is tart. Go bigger. he would then go on to wash his hands and his mouth. Now, his hand wash and possibly mouthwash would have been made from a mixture of water and spirits of wine, so brandy. What this means for us is that the water he was using to wash with had alcohol in it. And we now know that that means that there was some antibacterial, antiseptic properties to it. So essentially it was acting as a mild hand sanitizer. Now, thanks to Duke Saint-Simon's memoirs, we also know a couple of other things about Louis, like a kind of quirks. First, we know that he changed his clothes multiple times throughout the day, including what we presume are his body linen, so his shirt, in part because Louis was a sweaty bitch. We also know that, quote, every other day we saw him shave himself. Now, this is actually, I think, where the first point of confusion for both Peter and Georges come into play, because they both seem to overlook the comment about shaving, focusing more on the end of the passage where Saint-Simon wrote, no toilet table was near him. He had simply a mirror held before him. Now, what I think Georges misunderstood, and as a result Peter, because Peter only actually used Georges as reference, he didn't actually look at the primary sources himself, which we'll talk more about later. Georges seems to have interpreted this to mean that Louis like shaved his face dry without any sort of water or soap, but that does not correlate to the images we have of men shaving from the 17th and 18th centuries, where water and soap is clearly used. Well, I guess it's completely possible that, you know, he scraped his face with a razor dry and, you know, dealt with that discomfort that we all are very well aware of. I think what is actually implied is that Saint-Simon noted that a servant was holding up the mirror and that Louis XIV wasn't using a toilet table. And what this would then do would actually allow more visibility of the body of the king for those who were in his bedchamber. Because this whole process was a part of that public sort of performance art of getting dressed that he popularized to help maintain control of the aristocracy, because if they didn't give him something to do, they would get up to bullshit, which, you know, happened. When you view this whole behavior pattern, right, as a sort of performance art, keeping the body of the king away from a toilet table and keeping it more open and visible for people was much more interactive and a lot more desirable, because simply the table would hide a king. I believe that there might have been either a little side table that held the bowl and the razor and the soap and everything the king needed to shave his face, or like another servant was holding the bowl and the razor, because it's not like they were floating around in thin air or on the floor or on the bed. Like, that doesn't make any sense. I just think what Saint-Simon was trying to point out was that someone was holding the mirror and that he wasn't using a toilet table, because those are big pieces of furniture. I have one. This is what it looks like. Further, while I haven't read all of the accounts that Georges references in his book, when reading Saint-Simon's description of the waking and dressing process for King Louis, if we read between the lines, there are obvious moments in this performance art piece that would actually allow the king privacy to wash his body and his private body parts without being on public view. Because there's actually several instances where people either leave the chamber or he leaves the chamber and they come back in, and so he's left alone or with his most close personal body servants. Now, just because it's not referenced directly, it doesn't mean that bathing or washing his body didn't happen. It just wasn't a part of that public consumption performance art, which, fair. I mean, I wouldn't want to watch people watch me bathe. You'd have to pay me a lot of money for that, and even then, it's not really a part of my thing, you know what I mean?
A few moments later.
Oh, mon ami.
While the 17th and 18th century views towards hygiene are different than ours, I will grant you that, that doesn't actually always correlate to the people being dirty. Now, in my hygiene myth video here and my laundry video, we do deep dives on both how historic hygiene worked and how it was actually effective. So I'm not going to get into the weeds with it here in this video. Just go and watch these two videos, okay? And it will kind of cover everything because they are beefy videos in their own right. But just for clarity, in case you're new here, this is like one of the first videos you're watching or you haven't had a chance to watch these videos yet, dry rubbing your body with linen, which is actually a fabric that has been scientifically proven to be antimicrobial, is actually an effective way to clean your body. Additionally, most of our filth is passed onto and into our clothing throughout the day and not actually washed off in the shower. So Louis changing his clothing multiple times a day is actually going to be an effective way in helping keep his body clean, sweat, and odor free, and to help him also just feel cleaner. Also, just like side note, keep in mind they didn't have polyester, they didn't have acrylic, they didn't have nylon. So all of the fabrics were really breathable, especially having linen next to the body. You're not like sitting in your own juices like you do with polyester. It's also noted by Saint Simon that Louis was sensitive to perfumes and strong scents. And I think this is also something that people always seem to forget because they always talk about how strong perfumes were and how people wore them all the time. But according to Saint Simon, that actually could be a bad decision, especially if you wanted to be in the king's good graces, because, quote, he had headaches and vapors caused by the undue use he had formerly made of perfume, so that for many years he could not endure any except for the odor of orange flowers. Therefore, if you had to approach anywhere near him, you did well not to carry them, aka he best not smell ya, you know, like it ain't gonna work. To answer the first question, was Louis XIV a hygienic person? By all accounts, yeah, absolutely he was.
Part 2. Bathrooms in Versailles. Connected to this whole Louis XIV only bathed twice in his life thing, Hasbro did a video about bad history TikToks. They actually do go a bit more in depth on this particular subject. For this video though, I just need everyone to know a couple of things. First, people fail to mention or realize that Versailles was a construction site during a large portion of Louis XIV's life. It was a hunting lodge when he was a child, and it was built on a swamp. So yeah, of course it stank there. Secondly, according to one source, Louis XIV built 100 bathrooms at Versailles, one for every suite. This doesn't mean that everyone had access to those spaces, but for the people who lived there, they did. Plus, they didn't use bathrooms like we use bathrooms. They had more transportable objects like potties and Baudelaire's, etc. Third, he literally built bathing chambers at Versailles, a lot nicer than the one that we're in right now. This is very well documented. There's even a marble tub that still survives in the orangery. The Palace of Versailles website discusses this very clearly, describing how there were 5 rooms in total, many of which comprised of marble walls. That's still a bougie bathroom even to this day. Now, the bath chambers were renovated in the 1690s to create more living space because Louis XIV had a lot of fucking kids, okay? But that doesn't negate their existence and Louis's investment in them. Plus, when the bathrooms were renovated to living quarters, Louis was an old man. He died in 1715 and they were renovated in like the 1690s. So for all of this talk surrounding Louis's fear of bathing, that's a lot of money to invest in a phobia, you know what I mean? Part 3. How many baths did Louis actually take? Where the fuck does this whole fear of bathing and only 2 baths in this man's lifetime come from? Okay, like where does this whole conspiracy theory come from? Put on your tinfoil hats, babes, because we got some unpacking to do. Peter Ward's book, The Clean Body, A Modern History, was published in 2019. And at the same time, we saw a big shift in social media consumption and sharing of information, thanks in large part to TikTok. His book, for all intents and purposes, is a legitimate secondary source. It's got footnotes, it's got citations, it was published by McGill Queen's University Press, which is a well-known and reputable academic publisher. However, he fucked up. The line that opens chapter 1 begins with, Louis XIV took 2 baths during his royal lifetime. There is no footnote following that sentence, y'all. The footnote is found at the end of the paragraph, and that paragraph is filled with statements about Louis's hygienic practices, or lack thereof. Je n'ai pas pris de douche depuis 36 jours. I have not had a shower in 36 days. Mon ami. And when you go to Peter's footnote, he cites one source, George Vigarello's book, The Concept of Cleanliness, Changing Attitudes in France Since the Middle Ages. Specifically, he cites pages 13, 18, 25, and 68. George's book was published by Cambridge University Press in 1988. Personally, I don't like using secondary sources that old, mostly because the age of the internet has brought forth a lot more accessibility of information, a lot more just new information. But in George's defense, unlike Peter, he uses primary sources. And he uses a lot of them. When we go to pages 13, 18, 25, and 68, I do still struggle to see how Peter came to his conclusions that homeboy here only had 2 baths in his entire lifetime. Georges never states that. On page 13, Georges is using the Journal de Santé de Louis XIV, which is a memoir of Louis's doctors, to explain like how the doctors were actually using the baths to help Louis convalesce from a really severe, very serious illness.
Coming out of me like lava!
And they did do these baths as a medical practice twice, but it was never just 2 baths, okay? Georges literally writes, Fagon resorted to it again, very cautiously for a few days. So he's literally implying that the baths happened over the course of several days, not just once. Furthermore, because Georges actually cites his primary sources, I was actually able to find a few of them, including the Journal de Santé de Louis XIV. This was republished in the 1860s. And before we get too into the weeds about what is actually said or is not said about this whole bathing situation, it is always good to remember that the 19th century is notorious for censoring and adulterating historical records. With that in mind, when we read the 1860s version of this that is on Gallica, the publishers do state in the very beginning that they've published this memoir exactly as it was in its entirety from the 1600s, and that they've only added contextual notes when needed, which we actually do have one in the section that we're looking at, so we can see how it actually worked and how it's applied. I give this preface not to like discredit the source or the validity of the source, but just to kind of give context that it is the best that we have available, at least what I have available at this point in time, and it also might not be the entire truth. In Journal de Santé de Louis XIV, there is a couple of sections of note, but in particular, I wish to call attention to this one particular paragraph, which was translated from 19th century French into English, thanks to our good friends Google Translate. I will not be reading this in the French. I do not wish to insult the memory of my French ancestors more than what I have already done in this video, nor do I wish to insult my French audience more than what I've already done. I'm so sorry, by the way. But I feel like making fun of Louis XIV is like kind of fair game. From the passage, The King's Baths. On the 7th of August, the king, being well prepared, gave the baths that I had ordered him to confirm his health. He continued them until the 17th. He entered them in the morning and at 7 o'clock in the evening. He remained there for 2 hours each time, and then he was purged on the 18th of the month, very fortunately. Great. Now, the doctor literally states that over the course of 10 days, Louis took 20 baths. 20! Now look, my French is butchered, all right, from the lack of practice, but also the fact that I took this little side quest into learning Swedish in my 20s. But I can still count to 20, and that book clearly states, bon, bon. Furthermore, Georges, and as a result, Peter, because Peter couldn't do his own research, both discuss Louis's fear of bathing. Now, while they associate this with general concern around the fear of water and the spread of disease, I wish to present another interpretation of this statement. Because when you read this within the context of the original documentation, there's something else that makes a little bit more sense. They write, the king never wanted to accustom himself to the baths of the chamber except this one occasion. His Majesty, having an extraordinary apprehensions of the return and the continuation of his, quote, inconveniences, read his really severe illness. And it was like super gross. I'm not going to share it, but just take my word for it.
Coming out of me like lava!
He took the resolution to bathe for as long as it was judged appropriate, which succeeded very happily for him. To continue the quote, I made His Majesty take his opiate every morning at the entrance of the bath, and then a broth upon leaving, which kept his belly free. He stayed in the bath for 2 hours in the morning and the same number of hours after dinner. Now look, I don't know about you, but I find it very reasonable that if Louis did develop a fear of bathing, that could easily be explained by the trauma of this whole thing. Because what I haven't read to you again was how he was bled multiple times, he was poked, he was prodded, he was given enemas, in addition to just being extremely sick and being on death's door. And all of this was a part of his healing journey. To be given opiates, which are known to cause constipation, and then a laxative multiple times a day, and then take a bath for 2 hours. I could see how someone could develop some negative connotations around bathing, don't you? I mean, just within reason, right? There's a little bit of PTSD wrapped up in this. And I don't necessarily think that what the doctor was describing with never wanted to accustom himself to the baths is actually about daily hygienic practices, but it's more about a reflection of the king's actual very active lifestyle. Simone even writes that the king was fond of air, and when deprived of it, his health suffered. Now, remember how I mentioned earlier that the 19th century publishers, the Journal de Santé, mentioned that they would make notes where it was needed? They actually do make a note in this section about Louis not wanting to be accustomed to baths. And they wrote, "It is remarkable, in fact, that Dangeau's journal, where all the actions of the role are noted day by day, not indicate that Louis XIV was bathed." So what they're referencing is the Journal du Marquis de Dangeau, which is another memoir from the period. What this tells us, though, is that not a single source tells the entire story of Louis XIV, especially his private bathing practices. There is nuance and context that we are missing and will never have. However, when we look at the sources we do have, it is evident that Louis was concerned with hygiene and his health. He also built expensive and luxurious bathing chambers in Versailles, though we don't know how often he used them. We also know for a fact that he took more than 2 baths in his lifetime, and he lived to the respectable old age of 76, which is good regardless of what century we're in. So, my friends, let's consider this myth busted. And we also need to take this myth as a lesson. Always check the footnotes. And if you love history, you also might be interested in hearing my little announcement. I've actually been working really hard over the past several months to create some really fun products that celebrate our collective love of fashion history. So first, I have the cutest damn pen ever. It is a 2-in-1 corset pen that is fully functional when you open it. And it even has padding. Look at it, it's so cute. I just love her so much. This is a super limited edition enamel pen, and while I do hope to do more corset pens in the future, this colorway and the stain on the inside, it won't be done again. This is the only run it'll ever be, and there's not that many of them, okay? If you like it, go ahead and get it now before it's gone forever. The other thing that I've been working on with a lot of help and input from my Patreon is actually a tote bag. And I know everyone's like, oh, it's a tote bag. No. This one's great. One, it's massive, but it also has functional zippers, both on the exterior pocket and the interior pocket. And it has the cutest little design that was illustrated by my friend Nicole Album. And it says fashion history is history because it is, with a corsets through history timeline on it. This tote bag will hold the biggest MacBook Pro with tons of other room. It's perfect for school, errands. I'm so excited by it. I love it. And I think you all will too, especially if you are someone who loves a good tote bag. Now, both of these items are available at my DFTBA storefront, which is in my description. And it also should be visible below in my storefront. So you should just scroll down a little bit and it should be right there. With that, my history loving friends, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already, and to also check out the videos about hygiene and laundry for more in-depth discussions about those particular subjects. And with that, 'tis I, Louis XIV, signing off. Good day. I'll see you all back here next time. Bye. Case closed. In the Journal de Santé du Roi, I learned today that Crocs aggressively float. They were literally making my feet float away. So now they are glorified bath toys. Excellent. Look at me go. All right. Journal de Saint Louis. No. Pierre Escargot, motherfuckers. The Journal de Santé du Louis XIV. I know I could say 14, but I can't. Ah! That was a terrible pun. It was awful. Dee, 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 dee.